All right, everyone, here we go. Here we go. Another episode of Diverse Talking Heads podcast. I'm your host, Calvin Gibbs. And tonight, man, we got a hot topic for you tonight. This is one that we easily could do 2 or 3 hours talking about it. Tonight's topic is sex workers. Yes, sex workers. You heard that right. Only on Diverse Talking Heads. And I have a studio full of panelists here with me. I'm going to call them one by one and ask them to just greet our audience. We'll start with Karen.
Good evening, everybody. Glad everyone was able to make it.
Welcome, Karen. And next, Amy.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome, Amy. And Koshal.
Peace, everyone.
Peace, my brother. Dan.
Good evening, everyone. Looking forward to our discussion.
Yes, indeed. Charlie.
Good evening, Calvin. Thanks for everybody being here.
All right. And Marcette.
Good evening, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well tonight. Looking forward for the discussion.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And let's get right into it. I think we need to start with some definitions. When I did the research, I always was like, okay, let me get a good foundation here. And I think knowing what I'm talking about, what is the definition of certain things, is a great way to get started. So my research on just the word or the phrase sex worker is a person who provides sex work either on a regular or occasional basis. Okay, the term is used in reference to those who work in all areas of the sex industry. And according to one view, sex work is different from sexual exploitation or the forcing of a person to commit sexual act, in that sex work is voluntary and is seen as the commercial exchange of sex for money or goods. So with that being said, we have a good basis of what sex workers are and how that term is considered in the vernacular. Amy, since you came up with the topic to talk on sex worker, I'm going to ask you your thoughts on sex workers as far as it being a legitimate occupation.
Thank you so much. Thanks for throwing out the first question to me. I appreciate it. And thanks for taking on the topic. Pardon me. When I suggested it, I was like, oh, are we treading on, are we not going to talk about this? But you embrace every topic. So just thank you and everyone so much for being willing to discuss. I appreciate you starting with that definition, because if you hadn't, then I would have definitely thrown it out there that the topic as I envisioned it was very different from exploitation, trafficking, stuff that was being forced or coerced. And so thank you for delineating that clear separation. You know, back in the day, I mean, I was raised super religious. Part of the reason I'm fascinated this was because even up to, maybe 10 years ago or so, I would have been an absolutely not, under no circumstances. No, it is always wrong. I think that is an extremely narrow point of view. And I will try not to talk too long because we have so many people on this panel. But one thing that is very important is I think that legalizing sex work, again, not trafficking, etc., is that it will make it easier to cut down on the criminal activity and forcing people and coercing. Right now, almost everything, I mean, there's different states, different areas where the laws are a little bit different, but almost everything has to be done underground. You hide from authority. There's almost no legal protection. There's not good medical care and so on. And I think if we go farther in legalizing sex work, then we can actually protect victims who are not engaged in legitimate sex work that need protection. So I absolutely think that it is a type of work that should have legal protections, and have really changed my mind a lot from kind of the views that I would say were forced onto me in the way I was raised. So thank you.
Okay, that's a very interesting response, and I'm taking down some notes. I'm going to get back to you on that one. I know that growing up in the inner city of Brooklyn, New York, we had sex workers of the day, and they were called ladies of the evening, ladies on the street. We knew all of them in the neighborhood by name. We saw them every single day. They knew us, we knew them, okay? But they were called prostitutes. And that was a very negative connotation. As a sex worker, okay, what is the difference in a prostitute and, let's say, a dancer in a club, a stripper in a club? They both are sex workers. One has a negative connotation, one has acceptable connotation, shall we say. Dan, what's your thoughts?
So thank you for the definition, Calvin and Amy, because one of my concerns was the exploitive part of this work that I've seen happen to people. I'm all for legalizing it. It's another form of work. We should tax it just like anything else. You should be given medical care and protections and all those kind of things that other people who work get. At least most of them. A lot of people who work don't get those protections, but that's a whole nother podcast. So, I think this harks back to our American Puritanism and squeamishness with sex in general. We like to use it to sell things, but when it comes to anything else, we tend to be squeamish about it, and we have trouble talking about it, and we don't want to talk to our kids about it, and we don't want other people to talk to our kids about it, and all those kind of things just kind of cascade down. And I think this is part of that structure. Obviously, this is a profession that's been around since there's been people. They might have been exchanging flint arrowheads for all I know back in many ancient times, but it's an exchange. As long as it's consensual, it's an exchange, it's a business. You should frankly be allowed to do it. And I think Amy has a great point that now allows us to take resources we use chasing down those who are consensual to stop those who are being harmed and exploited.
All right. Now, I know that our panelist Karen had a lot to say about this. Karen, I'm just going to ask you, we know that sex work can take the form of prostitution, stripping, lap dancing, pornography, phone sex, internet sex, or anything like that. Should there be a stop at the actual exchange of money for sex, or should all of it, as Dan said, be legalized? I mean, we know that the stripping and lap dancing, there's money that is exchanged, but it's not actual for sexual services, shall we say? Do you think it should all be legalized across the board?
I think it all should be legalized, believe it or not. Sex for money did not become illegal until 1910. Prior to that, you could pay for sex, and it's called the Mann Act. And because they were paying for sex. And the thing about it is, there's only one state in the United States where you pay for sex, and that's Nevada. Now, even though prostitution is legalized in Nevada, I mean, if that's what someone wants to do, decriminalize it. It's a personal choice to me, unless it has a criminal element attached to it. Now, if it has a criminal element attached to it, then yeah, make it a crime. But why not? They're still doing it. Escorts do it. It's a matter of not getting caught with an escort.
It's true. That is true.
Yeah, but we were rolling free and happy until a group of who knows who decided, let's make it illegal. For years, up in 1910 is when it started. And then it resurfaced in 1970 because of people on the street wanting to have sex with other people. We had a congressman in DC who wanted to legalize prostitution, saying it was between two consenting adults. Why not legalize it? If people want to pay for it, let them pay for it. But if it's illegal activity, don't do it.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Thank you for that answer, Karen. I kind of feel you held back a little bit, but we're going to get back to that later. Just a second. We're going to get back to that. Kaushal, I have a question for you, sir. From a moral point of view, is sex working or workers in sex something that can be accepted in the moral majority? Can the majority of people go along with it and say, well, this is a way to earn income. This person can set their own hours and, write their own contracts, whatever the case may be. They can be an independent or contract worker. Is this something that we can get behind on from a moral point of view?
Yes, it's something that we all can get behind from a moral point of view. And to those who believe prostitution or sex work is inherently evil, immoral, I would ask them, how does making sex work illegal solve the increasing problem of human trafficking? It clearly does not. Human trafficking is just getting worse and worse. So to those who want to live in a more moral society, I would tell them that they should support legalizing sex work because, as was mentioned earlier by Amy and others, legalizing it will remove the criminal infrastructure that has been built around sex work. And it will allow us to fight human trafficking a lot more directly. I think that is the best moral outcome, and everyone should be able to get behind it.
Interesting. And let's go with Marcette. Marcette, I was looking at demographics and I came across some statistics that says that transgender people are more likely than the general population to be involved in sex work, is particularly trans women and trans people of color.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought that as well. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I do know, if you subscribe to, I know that some of the people we touched on the religious background, I do know that, someone mentioned that this is supposedly the world's oldest profession. I've heard to it referred that way. So it has this, obviously, they make mention of it in most religious texts, including the Bible and other, texts that you believe in. So it's been around literally since, like you said, the beginning of time. I did not know that about transgender. I don't know if that has something to do with acceptance, so to speak. I think that there's still a heavy stigma on the transgender community, and maybe that's something that they're doing to kind of seek acceptance sexually. So I'm just throwing that out there. But I do think on a broader scale that 20-year-old me, and I think we all kind of grow up indoctrinated. Oh, sex bad, unless it's between two consenting adults that are married, this, that, and the other. And just doing my research, I guess it kind of follows the same pattern. Whenever something is legalized, it goes underground and it has less regulation, and the government doesn't get an opportunity to tax it, to be quite honest. So with like prohibition, when people outside of the government were making untold millions, Al Capones and these other groups of people were making millions of dollars off illegal alcohol. Then they repealed prohibition, and now the government gets a healthy sum of money. I think it was funny, somebody mentioned, the religious aspect of it, but a lot of the Mormon states are the states with the highest levels of prostitution and pornography. I take that back, not prostitution, pornography. So it's out there, and the middle-aged me understands that, yeah, if there is a need, that after you've lived a little bit, you come into the world kind of blind to some realities. After you've lived and you've had a couple of your married friends cry on your shoulders and this, that, and the other, you realize that, okay, well, there may be a need for regulated services, to put it that way. I'm trying to make sure that I keep I don't know what we can and can't say yet on the podcast. But my concern is, I know now with the rise of OnlyFans and those type of situations where you can do something today and then 5 years from now your kids can see you online, that has been an issue. But if I think you're saying something in privacy and it's controlled and regulated, I don't have a problem with that, because obviously, to cut down on illegal trafficking, to cut down on kidnapping little kids, boys and girls, and selling into sex work. If that would significantly cut that, then I'm all for it.
Okay. Thank you for that.
May I try and chime in, Marcette? You hit something on the head that you hit the hammer to the nail, as they say, when that was the purpose of starting the fight over in 1970. It was for feminists and the LGBTQ community, so that
Mm-hmm.
they would have rights,
Yeah,
they would get benefits.
and I was gonna. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No.
I was going to chime in on your point too about the Man Slave Act originally also was to prohibit miscegenation.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big part of that as well. So
Yes.
that was one of the things that they started, the Man Slave Act, to keep people from certain groups to be able to pay to have sex with certain groups of women. So that was a big part of that.
Yes.
Okay. Charlie, in some cultures, they used to say, well, they may still say it, it's hard out here for a pimp. Are we putting the pimps out of
Oh,
business?
that movie, yeah.
Are we putting the pimps out of business?
Well, yeah, but the term pimp applies illegality, so it's not a bad thing. But the idea of organizing sex, making a business, just like the selling a pot, for instance, which is done in many states now, it can be done, and it's been very successful doing that. Obviously, certain standards have to be reached on that. Of course, particularly health standards and all that has to be done on it. I have to comment on one comment earlier. It was from Dan, who said that something to the effect that our society is, being the American society, is very prudish. And I am a big believer in that. And not just this issue, but many more issues. And we could probably do a whole show on just the puritanism of American culture, now and throughout history. I totally agree with that. I did some research on this show. I watched a special on it on PBS, and a couple things that were interesting. In the state of California, they are not prosecuting. I believe they're not prosecuting sex workers anymore. So what they're doing is they're not doing it. They're going after the pimps or whoever's running the operation, but they're looking more at the prostitutes, female prostitutes particularly, as victims, and not people who should be prosecuted on that. And I think that there have been laws passed in the state of California, as well as a couple other states, looking at them more that way. So the old days, like, let's round up the sex workers, and throw them in jail and that sort of thing. So I found that very interesting. I also saw that there are, I think it's between 15 and 20,000 prosecuted cases a year of sex crimes, which is a lot. And more importantly, of course, the first question is the necessity of doing that. And the second thing is just clogging up the courts with them, where there are obviously other issues that have to go to the courts as well that arguably are more important. So those are kind of my thoughts on that. But yeah, I'm fascinated by the idea of the puritanism of American society, and that should maybe be another episode, just kind of more broadly talking about that.
Well, I got to follow up on that question, Charlie. I don't feel you didn't answer my question.
Go ahead, sir.
Completely. So we're going to go back to that for a second. Okay. So I'm a pimp, right? I'm a pimp. I'm trying to make it. I'm trying to make it, man. I'm trying to do my thing. You see what I'm saying? But everybody's down on me because I use the word pimp. That's why I'm a player. You know what I'm saying? But my sister, she does the same thing that I do. And they call her a madam. And it's okay. Why is it okay for a madam to do the same thing as a pimp? But just because she ain't called a pimp,
it would be okay.
She don't have what I have down here. So why is it okay for her and not for me?
Well, first, I'm very impressed with your invitation. I hope that has nothing to do with real life or anything. But but that being said, no, that wouldn't matter if it was male or female, pimp or a madam. That wouldn't matter at all. That's the owner of the business. And that's an illegal business. So yeah, are we talking about something like, let's make it legal? And, obviously if certain rules or regulations are followed to do that, I like the others have spoken earlier, I don't have a problem with that. That can be done. And yes, pimp or madam, or probably more nicer word, would be called those individuals, like, CEO or something, or, the manager or something.
CEO. Okay.
Well, it could be that. Yes. I mean, that's what we're talking about.
All right. I'm gonna jot that down as well.
Well, if that's something you're interested in, sir. Yeah.
We may come back to that. But
Okay.
but here's a
I
question.
look forward to it.
But here's a question for anybody that wants to take it. We always talk about the government is regulating our lives too much. We want to get them out. But when it comes to and we're going to just put this on a woman right now, when we talk about sex and what a woman wants to do with her body, why is this okay to be regulated by the government?
I asked the same question because most of the people who are regulating are the users and the users.
Well said. Very well said.
So regulating for health, regulating for those kind of things, just like we have food laws and everything else, I think is a positive. So I wouldn't give a blanket against regulation. Keeping people from doing their business, let's face it, we have these laws. Most of them were against women over time. So if you're going to continue to keep it illegal, I think you should leave the sex workers alone and start prosecuting the Johns, because it's a supply and demand thing, just like anything else. They bring drugs into our country because people here use them. If we stopped using them, we wouldn't have them coming across the border. It's the same kind of thing. So I would just suggest that if you're going to continue to be puritanical, that perhaps you're arresting the wrong people. And I'll leave it at that.
That's interesting, because at some point, if a person's going to be required to pay taxes and keep a record of their activities and all, then we start getting into the area of how much is being charged for what, how much is the government going to get for this service, how much they're going to get for that service, how long are you actually working, and it becomes a little tricky. It starts to change the dynamic, I think. Does anybody want to chime in on that?
I mean, the flip side of the perspective is right now it's completely regulated in that it is almost universally blanket illegal. I realize Nevada has a different set of laws, but across most states. And yes, things would change. Like if it was to be more legalized, yes, you would probably get into different taxation for different types of services. Like who knows how this would go? Tell me another business that isn't like that. Like if you go into business and it's not just a completely under the table operation, you should expect that you will have to deal with different regulations based on the size of your company, how many employees you have, how much you make, where it is. I feel like if we get to the point that we're discussing that issue, it would make me happier, because it would mean that we're not, as we've circled back to again, sort of persecuting or prosecuting or using resources, chasing down activities that could be made safer, activities that could be involving one or multiple individuals who actually don't mind being there, who are earning a living, who are having needs met. So I mean, unless we just do away with all regulations across absolutely everything, I almost feel like that's not the correct argument to be having.
Now that's very thoughtful, Amy. But when a woman, what happens in the case that a sex worker becomes pregnant, doesn't want to become pregnant, but it happened, okay? Doesn't want to have the baby, but because of the laws in the country, can't get rid of the baby, can't have an abortion.
I mean, I don't agree with those laws either.
Wait a minute.
More regulation of a woman's body. Like what, why are you telling, if the thing is, does the dad deserve to know? That can be a part of the contract going in. Hey, we're going to take every precaution that we can to make sure this doesn't happen. You need to wear this. I'm taking this. We all sign off on it.
Wait a minute. Marcel, let me talk to you for a minute. They're taking all the fun out of it. They tell me what I can and cannot do, what I have to wear. Help me out. Come on, get it.
Well,
Jump.
well, yeah. Well, I mean, I do agree that you can't be just willy-nilly with it just for transmission of diseases and unwanted pregnancy. I do think that you need to be if this is a job and it becomes regulated, it should come with those conditions. I also think that, just as a retiring conspiracy theorist, I think that for most things, the government allows them. It suppresses it until they can figure out how to monetize it. Just like we talked about earlier with cigarettes and alcohol and these type of things. And now with weed, marijuana, I do think that eventually the times will call for them to figure out a way to regulate sex work, and we will see it as a regular part of society. But that's a slippery slope. Those questions do come up, and I think that's good. I think that there will be situations where they did take all the precautions, and these two people's inner workings and sperm and egg just couldn't be denied, and it happened. So the question is, like she said, what do you do in those cases? Do you sign a waiver? Hey, if you decide to, when you go in this room, then you are waiving your right to X, Y, and Z. I don't know, but I think all of those things need to be determined.
Mm.
I think the government is looking for a way to find different sources for taxation outside of
Absolutely.
on our tax forms every year. And as you mentioned, that was done with marijuana.
Yeah,
it's heavily taxed. Most of those places do very well. I'm an Uber driver. I take people to them or take them from there, and they're all happy. So, so there was a thing on there. Obviously, it has to go through stuff, we can talk about marijuana, the history of marijuana, another show, and there was a lot of complicated history on that as well. But they were able to, and it's not in every state, but it's growing. Right. And it's a revenue maker. And, revenue making is kind of a cynical thing, but there's a truism. The government needs more money for services and everything else that they do. And this is the way they do it. And people are happy to pay extra, to get their pot.
So Calvin, can I answer to this question you just asked?
Absolutely.
What I'm hearing is responsibility being given only to one party. And one of the things I've also noticed with a lot of our anti-abortion legislation across the country, only one party is being punished, prevented, whatever. There doesn't seem to be a responsibility for both parties. I'm a parent. We both were involved. We're both responsible. Okay? That doesn't matter if you're a hetero couple, a gay couple, whatever. When there's two people involved in this transaction, there has to be culpability on both sides. And yes, there could be times with all your precautions, because it happens in real life, that somebody gets pregnant. But what we allow now is for one party to walk away.
Well, Dan.
And I have a problem with that.
Well,
so I think that goes to the heart of the question you just asked.
Well, you know what? There's another problem that's attached to that, Dan. It's proving you got the right two parties. When you have a situation like that, it could be, mama's baby, daddy's maybe.
Yeah, well, we have genetic tests that can take care of that problem now. So
yeah, if you can track somebody down.
Okay. No, I understand there's mechanical difficulties in doing that. What I'm saying is, from what I gathered from your question, maybe not your intent on the question, was that we are asking one party what happened. Well, if we're going to make this legal, I believe part of the contract. So now that it's legal, somebody can say, as part of the contract, if one party gets pregnant, they're both responsible. And you just put that up front. And if the person doesn't like the contract, they don't engage in the contract.
I think we're going to take a little break right here. We're going to put the pin in it. We're going to get a drink of water, let this settle in, and we'll be back on Diverse Talking Heads podcast.
Got a feeling that I might die tonight. Woke up in the morning, raving for a brand new day. Birds singing, I was swinging, awake, I was on my way. Then a little voice inside said, baby, are you alright? And now I'm damned if I just might make it to the nighttime. I got a feeling that I might die. Like I'm crazy, crazy all inside. Where to go, who to see, how to be? Is it crazy if I just be me? Oh, I got a feeling that I might die tonight.
And we are back. This is Diverse Talking Heads Podcast. And today we are talking about sex workers. Sex workers. We're going to move the conversation along a little bit and go into the area of health. The health that need to be in place for these sex workers. But right now, currently, the way it is, the sex workers usually are unlikely to disclose their work to healthcare providers. Okay. But if it was legalized, that may change. I'm going to ask Kaushal a question, and maybe he knows the answer to this. But in India, is sex workers a legalized occupation?
Before our conversation tonight, I did a small amount of research about the legality of sex work throughout the world, and I was surprised at how many classifications of legality there were. And I think in India, it's not illegal, but it might be similar to that arrangement Dan had mentioned, in which selling sex is not criminalized, but buying sex is. I am really not sure.
Okay, and the reason I asked that is because I came across some information. It was actually pictures of women protesting, Indian women protesting for their right to work as sex workers. But let's move into the area of health. Okay, when we talk about having sex, there's going to be a lot of health risks, sexually transmitted infections and drug use and things like that. Should the government, if they legalize it, also provide some good health for these sex workers, or are they going to be forced to struggle with healthcare like everybody else in this country?
Well, yes, the workplaces are always regulated, and there are government agencies whose job it is to make sure that the workplace is healthy. So there's no question that if sex work is legalized, then the problems you mentioned of sexually transmitted infections and other problems will require some government intervention to minimize.
Anybody else want to jump in on that before my next question?
I would just comment that, and I can't remember if we've done an episode on this or not, but the way healthcare is done in this country is kind of ridiculous, given the way it is tied to the workplace. So I would want to say I don't like the way healthcare is done in general, but I also don't know why there would be an exception for just a single profession with the way it is run. Having said that, I think the whole thing needs overhauled.
I agree with you, Amy. I don't like the way that it's set up in this country as it is right now, but I do know that people work hard for their money, and the healthcare costs are through the roof. How much harder would somebody have to work in the sex area to be able to afford all the taxes and healthcare and things that's going to go along with that? It's starting to look like it's not so much fun anymore.
Calvin, what's interesting? I'm glad this question was asked, because at the Bunny Ranch, the owner provided medical coverage for all the workers, and they had to have physicals.
And when I was taking care of my girls, they all had health care.
Yeah, he had doctors come in,
That's
come
right.
to the ranch.
That's right.
Which
Oh, my
was
girl was
good.
taken care of. They were
He had,
clean
he
as
had an
all that.
investment there. Yeah.
Yeah, Charlie, go ahead.
I was going to say he had an investment there. I was going to say, again, going back to the marijuana thing, again, that this sort of thing could also probably be taxed at a higher rate as well. Again, taxing is a cynical thing here as well. And perhaps part of that can go towards that healthcare as well, because that's done in, when you go buy pot. It could also be done, yes, when you go buy sex. You charge a higher rate, whatever the market is on that. I have no idea. And it varies from place to place. Yeah, you could do that. I think you could charge a higher rate, a tax rate on that.
So is this going to be like a brothel type of situation where, I mean, you can have strong workplace health practices? What about the person that's working independently? How can we protect them as well as the people that are in the corporation, shall we say, and they get that type of workplace health practice?
I think they would also be responsible for the safety of their own workplace. The regulations would apply as much to independent contractors as people working for a business.
Okay.
You could just do licensing, just like if you cut hair or you do nails, you got to get a license. There's certain regulations wrapped around that. So if you're an independent, there are people who years ago I used to have a guy who came to my house and he was a professional, came and cut my hair. Now I go to a place that has several people working there, and two owners and that kind of stuff. They're both regulated.
Or maybe they could get together and start a union. I know did have some sex worker unions. I believe it was in California area back in the early 70s. I'm not sure what became of that, but since we're bringing this up again, would a union type situation help ensure the health? Anyone?
I mean, I definitely think it could. I think also, and I don't want to monopolize the conversation too much, like sex work stuff's going to get transacted. Like you're not likely to keep whatever you have to yourself. So I think we would definitely want there to be healthcare, health regulations, because even if it's a cold, like the likeliness of you passing that on is pretty high. So if we want to have in general healthy communities, I think that if you are very physically, intimately interacting with another person, you should be, for the good of everyone, making sure that that individual stays healthy.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for your comments on this. And we're going to ask each of you, if you want to, have a final word on this topic of sex workers. Let's start with Charlie.
Well, again, going back to what I was saying, this is something with proper regulation, could be done legally. It could potentially also be taxed at a higher rate, where tax dollars are gained from that. And much like the marijuana trade, there are not going to be a lot of people complaining about it, and it would bring it in on that. Again, that's a cynical way of looking at it. But it has to be done right. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's got to be done right, and the proper regulations have got to be there for the safeties of the sex worker as well as the clients.
Okay, thank you. Amy.
I just deeply appreciate hearing everybody's thoughts and us covering the topic. I don't have anything personally additional to add, but thank you.
Thank you. Karen?
Okay, if I my final comment, I think it's going to be hard to legalize it because there are so many different aspects of it. How do you control this and miss something and not control that? So it's gonna be hard. It's gonna be hard, but it should be done. It should be done, and like Dan said, if you make sure that people have licenses, maybe that'll be helpful. And they have to renew it every year.
All right, thank you. Cultural.
We've had a great discussion about the implications of legalizing sex work, but I don't think we really talked about the benefits of sex work. We've kind of talked about it as something to allow, but not necessarily approve, morally. But I think it's something that we should approve morally. It was alluded to earlier that sex work can bring in income to a family. Also, if a person in middle or elderly age loses a spouse to death or divorce, they may not be able to find another life partner, or want they might not want to find another life partner to substitute for the one they lost, but they may still have needs, sexual needs that a sex worker could provide. Also, there are people with severe physical disabilities that who have sexual needs, and a type of sex worker called the sex surrogate can help them meet those needs. So I think we should see sex work as not just something to tolerate, but to celebrate.
All right, thank you. Dan?
I think American history has shown us that prohibition doesn't work. It didn't work with alcohol, didn't work with marijuana, it didn't work with a bunch of other things. And this is another form of prohibition. And what we found is if we can do it safely and without exploitation, we're going to make mistakes like we have on every other regulation and law, but we can fix it. I think it should be legalized. And just like every other worker, they pay taxes.
All right. And Marcette?
I think, like the Cultural and some other people alluded to, that there are actual benefits for some populations for having these type of professionals. So I think if we can regulate it and do it responsibly and make sure that there is adequate revenue coming into the government coffers for it, I don't have a problem with it. I think it's a need. And we all kind of touched on it's literally been here. It predates us. People will be doing it long after we've shuffled off this plane. So we might as well go into it eyes wide open and be responsible around regulating it.
All right, thank you. And as the final word, I will say that sex workers, they are entitled to live free of discrimination, stigma, and violence, of course. As with all people, their rights to life and health and privacy and bodily autonomy should not be infringed upon, and especially, I feel, by the government. They have the right to live. They have the right to make a living. They also have the right to contribute to the economy, okay? But this conversation has many more points. As Cultural mentioned, we didn't talk about the benefits too much. There's benefits, there's a positive side, and I still think that there's more on the negative side that we could bring out in this conversation. So we're going to table this right now, take a short break, and we're going to come back with our round robin discussion, which will be held by one of our panelists, only on Diverse Talking Heads podcast. And we are back. This is Diverse Talking Heads podcast, and we are going to go into our segment of the show, which is called our round robin discussion. This is being held by one of our panelists. We don't know what the topic is, but Dan, take it away.
Well, thank you, Calvin. My question for today is in today's world, it's very easy to fall into silos and only see information that either agrees with you or is very much similar to what you're used to. My question for the panelists, do you read or listen or watch any media that by people that you disagree with? And do you seek it out? or do you try to prohibit it from coming into your circle? Anybody is happy to jump in at this point.
Can I jump in?
Certainly.
I avoid it at every opportunity I can. I avoid it.
Can I ask you why?
Because if it's not going to teach me something, educate me, I'm not interested. And a lot of stuff is opinion and not fact.
Thank you. Amy?
I thank you for reminding me, because I have not done this in a while. I used to be very, very dedicated to having a practice where once a week I would try to seek out a positive news story from a community that was different from my own, whether it was around the world or whether it was just not white women or something like that. And in doing that, would come across information, just kind of in doing that research, that was teaching me things that I didn't know, or sort of took me outside of my bubble. So I would try to, in a controlled way, seek it out, because I think, to Karen's point, there is just a lot of opinion that you can get bombarded by. But if I went out with sort of a goal of, I'm looking for something very uplifting, positive, factual, but from a different, and I'm using the term broadly, community, that was my way of trying to keep some kind of balance in my life and make sure I wasn't building my own silo around myself.
Okay, great. Thank you. And just a follow up to it, we've heard a couple responses, and yes, there is a lot of opinion out there. There is some factual stuff out there. And is it also important, though, to hear other opinions? Would also be included in that. Calvin?
Well, I will say, Dan, that especially during our last presidential period, I did start to listen to those that I did not agree with. A lot of times I feel that to know what the enemy is doing, you need to watch them and keep your eye on them and kind of know where they may be coming from. That's also what I do in my personal life with my surroundings. And that's part of, I guess, growing up in New York City. I'm always watching what's going on around me, especially in my neighborhood. I want to see it coming before it actually happens. So yes, the answer is yes. I do sometimes watch news stories or news channels that I don't agree with. I know I'm not going to agree with them going in, but I want to see what kind of rhetoric they're putting out or what they're talking about, and try to figure out sometimes why they're talking about it. Who are they trying to reach or stir up, or what point of view are they trying to get across?
All right, great. Thank you, Calvin.
Dan, that's a great question. I am kind of the same way on this as well. I've heard other things before. Sometimes I consciously do it. Sometimes it's like, I'm flipping through channels and, like the button hits whatever channel I don't normally listen to, and I'll sit there and listen to a few minutes of it. I wish I could give you a specific example. I've been trying to think of one, but I can't, for some reason, think of something really stood out to me. But I think like the others said, we'll say like 3 minutes in, okay, I'm done, and then move on. There's a tolerance level, and I'm tired of listening to this stuff, or a much more nasty word. And okay, I did my 3 minutes. Okay, I got my quota in or whatever, and I'm going to move on.
Right. Kaushal?
As someone who was left leaning, I used to listen to some conservative commentators, and I greatly enjoyed it because I really enjoyed their perspective. I enjoyed how they expanded my mind and got me to see another perspective. But unfortunately, in the last 5 or 10 years, these same conservative commentators have become radicalized, and they dismiss things like critical race theory as some Marxist ideology. They are against masks and vaccines when it comes to COVID. I'm very disappointed in them that I can no longer learn from them. And I feel, unfortunately, that I am creating a silo for myself in which I'm only listening to the viewpoints from people that I'm already aligned with. I think I've given up on the conservative perspective.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I think like some of the other people are saying, I think what I find and just kind of, again, being new to the panel, I respect everyone's sense of inquisitiveness when it comes to intellect and learning. I feel that you guys all are readers and seekers of truth. Like myself, I read and look. So I will put myself in situations to see, I think like Charlie said, let me see what the opposition is saying, because I will find myself in debate sometimes. And I find that when, people ask you, well, hey, what do you think about so-and-so? I want to have an answer that may kind of seep through or make them think like, hey, wait a minute, I never thought about that. So I find myself constantly studying, but I think the barrier comes in, like Cultural said, I'll watch for a few minutes, and I think it becomes difficult as a member of one of the groups that opinion has caused harm to people in that group. When it's just opinion, oh, well, 2 + 2 is 19. Well, okay, well, if that's what you believe. But when that goes out to the point where people who believe that 2 + 2 are now have being physically jumped on, and I'm just using that as an example. When it comes to that point, it's no longer just harmless. So it becomes harder and harder to tolerate at that point. So I do think, like everyone else, I do have a certain threshold. And because I'm intellectually inquisitive, I will watch and kind of see, well, how did they get there? How did they formulate their conclusion? But when it comes to the point where people are saying the quiet part out loud and people are getting hurt, then it's harder to kind of to tolerate.
Great.
If I could add something on that, I think it's, for me personally, gotten really hard over time to listen to the other side. When I was younger, I was probably more of a moderate Republican. I consider myself more of a moderate Democrat now. I voted in all elections, many elections over the years. I voted for each party equally. I did the last election. I voted for one party almost exclusively. Okay. And I don't want that to be, and I think about that a lot, because I don't want to say, oh, you're getting old, you're getting set in your ways, you don't really care about anything else. And I, like doing this show, as we were talking before the show, I want to be open to other ideas and all that. But I'm finding, for the state of that in this country, it's really hard to do that. At least for me, it's really hard to try to do that and go back and, okay, I want to listen. I want to know what's going on there, even if I don't agree with it or not.
Okay, great. All great. I appreciate your responses. Let me leave you with this, that at some point, I think we should find a way to bridge the gap. And I also agree, there's just some things I can't listen to because there's bigotry involved and harm. But I think what I have found is that if I get away from the media of it, if I can actually talk to a person one-on-one and we can both be there physically, that there's more opportunity for us to find commonality. And you have organizations out there like Braver Angels and some of those others who are attempting to do that currently. And I think there's still, I try to hold out some hope by trying to listen to some other things, but you all had very good points because sometimes it's very hard. I'm looking for that magic that allows us to not all be siloed. Thank you. I'll give it back to you, Calvin.
All right. I like that, Dan, that magic that allows us all not to be silent. Thank you for that round robin discussion, Dan. And that's about all, y'all, for this segment of Diverse Talking Heads podcast. I'm your host, Calvin Gibbs, and I want to thank our guest panelists today, Charlie, Amy, Karen, Kaushal, Dan, and Marcette. Thank you all for giving your opinions on sex workers. Our next episode will be posted in just a few days, and I'm going to give you a little teaser about what it is. The topic of the next episode is, why is it okay for Blacks to use the N-word and no one else? Or is it? Only on Diverse Talking Heads podcast. And it's always imparting that we take 2 steps to the rear and get on out of here. Until the next episode of Diverse Talking Heads podcast, exit stage left.